You know that moment when you sit down at a restaurant, in a waiting room, maybe just on your couch, and before you've even registered what you're doing, your hand is already reaching for your phone. Not because you heard something, not because you needed anything, just because. And then you're scrolling, and a minute passes, and then five, and at some point you surface and think, wait, why did I even pick this up? The average person checks their phone around 96 times a day. That's roughly once every 10 waking minutes. And today, we're trying to understand the psychology behind people who are always on their phone. The ones scrolling at dinner, whose screen lights up every few minutes, who feel genuinely restless when it isn't within arm's reach. Because what's actually going on there is more interesting than it might look, and a lot of it has less to do with the phone itself than with what's running on it. First, the obvious. For a lot of people, being always on the phone is entirely intentional. Entrepreneurs managing teams across time zones, freelancers whose next client could message at any moment, content creators whose entire output lives on the phone, filming, editing, posting, responding, employees for whom being reachable isn't optional, it's the job. Others are keeping up with family or friends spread across cities or countries. And then there's everything else: maps, music, news, banking. For all of these people, the phone isn't a distraction, it's a tool being used with purpose. The behavior looks identical from the outside, but the psychology is completely different. It's not a habit loop or an anxious reflex. The complexity worth exploring starts when the use becomes hard to explain, when someone checks and isn't sure why, or feels a quiet pull when they can't put it down. Here's something that tends to get misunderstood. Dopamine isn't really a pleasure chemical. It's a seeking chemical. It drives you towards something, not what makes you feel satisfied when you get there. And crucially, the brain releases dopamine not when the reward arrives, but when a reward is possible. So every time someone opens an app, there's a chance something good is waiting. A message, a funny video, something surprising. The brain fires in anticipation, and that anticipatory feeling is what pulls people back, even when nothing interesting actually shows up. And the apps know this. The pull to refresh gesture, the one you use to reload your feed, was invented by a designer named Lauren Brichter in 2008. He built it over a weekend, for convenience. He later admitted it was addictive, and that it probably shouldn't exist. Because structurally, it's a slot machine lever. You pull down, there's a brief pause, and then you either get something new, or you don't. That unpredictability isn't a side effect of the design. It's the point. The same principle that makes slot machines so hard to walk away from works just as well on a feed. And while you're on that feed, there's no bottom. Infinite scroll. The feature where content just keeps loading as you go was invented in 2006 by a designer named Asa Raskin. He now estimates it wastes around 200,000 human lifetimes per day in unintended scrolling. His own words: optimizing for ease of use does not mean best for the user. Before infinite scroll, pages had page breaks, natural moments to stop and decide whether to continue. That pause was removed. The content just keeps coming. Over time, this becomes less of a choice and more of a loop, a moment of boredom, a flash of anxiety, a lull in conversation. These become cues that automatically trigger reaching for the phone. The routine happens almost before the thought does. And the reward doesn't even have to be good. Sometimes it's just the relief of confirming there's nothing to miss. The loop still works. That fear of missing something is real, and it runs deeper than it sounds. It's rooted in one of the most fundamental human needs: the need to belong, to stay in the loop, to not be left behind socially. And social media is specifically designed to activate that need. The feed shows everyone's highlights, the trips, the dinners, the milestones. It's a relentless, curated stream of other people's best moments, which your brain automatically compares against your own life, in real time, hundreds of times a day. That comparison process is ancient. Humans have always measured themselves against the people around them. It's how we orient ourselves socially. But social media has turned that into something with no natural off switch. The sample is skewed entirely toward peaks, and you're seeing it constantly. It's not surprising that it can leave people feeling subtly worse, and then going back anyway, hoping the next thing will feel better. There's a word for the anxiety people feel when they're separated from their phone: nomophobia. Something like 70% of people experience it to some degree. For many, it's mild, a slight restlessness. For others, it's a genuine discomfort, an inability to focus on anything else. Even more striking, about 80% of smartphone users report feeling their phone vibrate when it hasn't. The brain becomes so primed to expect a notification that it starts predicting them, manufacturing the sensation before anything's actually happened. That's not a quirk. That's the nervous system adapting to a new expectation. The phone has become part of how the brain models the world. For some people, the pull goes deeper still. How we learned to seek closeness and manage separation early in life shapes how we relate to a lot of things, including this. People who tend toward anxious attachment, who are hyper-attuned to whether others are present and responsive, often use the phone in a way that mirrors those patterns. It's always there. It always responds. It never goes quiet without explanation. In a strange sense, it offers a kind of reliability that real relationships, with all their complexity, sometimes don't. And beyond that, the phone holds photos going back years, messages from people who matter, notes, memories, a running digital record of who you've been and who you're connected to. Losing it doesn't just feel inconvenient. For many people, it feels like losing something of themselves. It's worth stepping back for a moment. None of what's been described here is accidental. Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, said in 2017, "The thought process was all about, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? You're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. The inventors understood this consciously, and we did it anyway. The red notification dot, the variable likes, the autoplay, the infinite feed. These are deliberate choices, shaped by decades of behavioral research, optimized to keep people engaged as long as possible." So what does all of this add up to? People who are always on their phone are navigating a mix of practical necessity, deeply conditioned habit, the brain's ancient seeking drive, the need to belong, and sometimes something more personal: anxiety, loneliness, or a sense of self that's become partly stored in a device. And they're doing all of that inside systems that were specifically built to make exactly this happen. When you see it that way, it becomes a lot less about willpower and a lot more about understanding what the phone and the apps on it are actually doing for people.